warm welcome to another edition of To The Point. On the show this week, a very special guest, the Chief Economic Advisor, Arvind Subramanian, who's retiring very shortly from his office. I welcome you on our program. My first question to you is that you're really going to miss the finance ministry, I suppose.
Very much so. I think, as I've said, I'm going to have withdrawal symptoms, and I might lapse into permanent depression, after these incredibly rewarding, fulfilling, adrenaline-filled, 3.5, 4 years. And of course, I'm going to miss working with my team, who I work with very closely, my colleagues. And of course, above all, I'm going to miss working with Minister Jatley.
But normally, the job of the Chief Economic Advisor is such that having a healthy rapport with the Finance Minister is the most crucial component. How often have you had differences, and those differences have been debated, discussed, and finally arrived at a consensus? So is that job a very difficult one, or was it easy for you?
It was, it was completely no sweat at all, but that's almost entirely due to the minister's temperament and his, what he is, what he expected from a CEA. And so it was not at all difficult to establish that rapport. I think he's also an extremely a man who believes in a kind of delegating, trusting style of functioning. And so it's not just true of me, but for all others, my colleagues in the Ministry of Finance have had that rapport with him. It's true that I think maybe I like to feel I have an extra special rapport with him, but it's absolutely the most critical relationship. I think one absolute essential feature of that is that you have to be completely, brutally honest with as an advisor with the finance minister, and he completely encouraged me to be
and
so.
And that honest advice which you always give is always not very comfortable for the
government.
government.
Absolutely. It's not you have to give him also the bad news, or where things are going wrong. It could either be externally, it could be domestically, and you have to do that, because otherwise, why get an outsider and why get a technocrat? I think that, and I think he really valued that. And with him, he was able to, he has a remarkably, cool temperament that he actually, encourages people to speak. For one thing, he's never ever raised his voice. In fact, I joke that the only time he raised his voice was actually in Parliament at the time of the GST vote. Okay. But that he was actually raising his voice against his own party people.
In fact, I was just about to come to that bit, that despite the two heavily loaded reforms, financial reforms, GST and demonetization, the way it was rolled out, and if you've not, you've just shared a very good rapport that's so surprising.
I give him a lot of, all the credit for that, for allowing this, me to be, function as I wanted to. But I think that it's also fair to say is that I've also had, wonderful working relationships with all colleagues, both in the ministry and in the government, and also a very close working relationship with the Prime Minister's office. I think that's also been very, very important.
You are known for your outspokenness. And in a government setup, an outspoken person would have his or her own views. He will have to give his independent advice to the government. But normally, the government officials or the ministers, so to say, do not take it in a very sporting manner all the time. It could become a handicap, or it could become, say, a quality like a lack of diplomacy, lack of tact.
See, I think that one has to distinguish between, what you say internally and what you say outside. It's true that career bureaucrats tend not to be completely outspoken always. It's not true. There are some who are always very outspoken and honest things. But I think there's something about being a career bureaucrat that I think maybe 30, 35 years of, the hierarchy getting the better of you. Someone like me who comes from the outside is not burdened by that. But internally, by and large, I think people speak up. But I think the critical question is how much you should allow this to be expressed publicly. I think that's the, my own rule is, and maybe I've made mistakes, I'm not sure, I'm sure I have, is that I think one should never speak outside on domains beyond economics, because I'm the chief economic advisor, not the chief political, counselor or the chief moral conscience or whatever.
And when you say that you made those mistakes, that was purely out of the fact that probably you tried to enter into the political domain, and that's when the mistakes
I've tried to stay clear of politics. I don't think I've said anything about politics, and I shouldn't. And I think, as I said, that's not my job. I think the more difficult question is that, but should you also speak up on economics publicly? And that I have.
But if a chief economic advisor does that, what's the harm?
No, I think that, this is I think the trick is, look, if you are part of a system, you try and work within that system, and therefore, you do that. Now, speaking out publicly, the only reason I think you should do that, if you think it's going to actually advance the, pro-reform, whatever, the good things that you want to try and accomplish. So, and sometimes it may work, it may not work, because after all, if you say things in public, it creates all kinds of trouble for the government, and then there's a backlash, and then you've kind of, undermined your own objective, right? So I think it's a tricky call. I think some people would say that no, you should not speak on this outside, even though you're a kind of technocrat and an insider, outsider. But my own view is that if you believe in a theory of change, and that so just to give you one example, right? Suppose there's a key policy maker and you've expressed your view internally, things haven't changed. You speak out in public possibly because you think you can, change public opinion in a way that will influence that key policy maker. So that's a kind of my theory of change and the rationale for speaking out publicly. But you have to do it with a lot of responsibility. You have to make sure that it's done in the right spirit, it's done in the right forum, it's done for the right reasons, and you can make mistakes. And honestly, we can. And there have been examples of that. And I think, but it's a tough call.
Right. Coming to the reforms first, before we get into the macroeconomic indicators for the country. Coming to demonetization first. When demonetization was announced, there was a lot of bad press which happened, that government shouldn't have done this, it was a hasty decision, it was a hasty call, and it has impacted the economy in a negative manner. Now when you look back 2 years from now, since the thing happened, do you think it was the right time for the government to take the decision on this?
See, I think that my views on demonetization, they were all clearly expressed in the economic survey. What we said at that point, and I think it remains true even now, that we said there would be short-term costs and there would be potential long-term gains. And I think that in the latest survey, we also said that a number of factors, including demonetization, may be contributed to the deceleration of economic growth from about mid-2016 onwards. Right. I think now that those things are behind us. But I do think that any cost-benefit analysis of a demonetization will always have to be provisional, because you've seen the costs. I think in the short run there are potential gains in the long run, and those are things we'll have to see as they come along. So we'll have to keep doing these provisional assessments of this, and I will leave it to others. When all the dust has settled, maybe in a year or two, people can make a definitive assessment of the costs and benefits of demonetization. So I leave it to the historians to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
But after demonetization was announced, very soon we got another financial reform in the form of GST, and people started debating that what was the need for bringing in GST so soon. You didn't even allow the shocks of demonetization to settle down, and here it was another big bang, on the economy, and lot of negative impact again on the informal sector. Right. And that the economic survey now points out that the economy is out of the negative impact. Now, how would you look at it? Maybe the government could have waited for some more time to announce the GST, or was it the right time?
You see, I think something like the GST, it is such a major reform of so much unknown consequence, really, that I honestly don't think that there's ever a right time to reform. It's just too complicated, too many unknowns. What that man famously said, what's his name, Donald Rumsfeld, unknown unknowns, or whatever it is, that there's no ever really a right time. So Were we prepared enough for it? I think is a question maybe we should ask. But I think that for me the more important point was that having done that and having encountered all the challenges, did the system have the capacity to correct mid-course, to respond to the challenges? And I think, to be very fair, I think the system did show a very remarkable ability to respond. I'll give you two examples, right? One, I think I certainly felt very strongly, and so did others, that the 28% rate was too high. It was too high a tax. And then, of course, it was there. But then once it was implemented, there was kind of a political reaction against that. And I think the GST Council responded by really whittling down quite substantially the number of products in Guwahati last year we had that. And I think we're going to continue making progress in that direction. I'm very confident that over the next year or so, that 28% hopefully will be virtually a shell or a hollow shell. And that will be, and that's one example of being able to respond to the
by when would this 28% slab would go in a shell? We can't say that.
We can't say, but I think it'll happen. I think it'll happen over the next 12 to 18 months. I think it should happen. Similarly, I think that this whole impact on the informal sector, and therefore a lot of effort and time was devoted to simplifying the compliance burdens on small and medium enterprises. That's why I think we raised the turnover for the composition scheme, simplified the forms, not monthly but quarterly. All those things happened, and it's continuing to happen. So I think those are examples of the system responding. Then we introduced the e-way bill system because compliance was becoming a problem. Again, they're in the process of simplifying the returns. So I think as long as we can keep doing that, and we iterate towards something over the medium term that is, that's close to what I wrote about in my revenue neutral report. I think that's I think a remarkable, I would say, reform.
GST was not a small reform. It was a very, very big financial reform. And do you think that the key to success lay in the cooperative federalism template which was brought in for this reform? Do you think that the key to success is that?
100%. I think that, look, see, the thing about the GST was, of course, there had been broad support for this over the last 10 years across party lines, and many, many people contributed to that. But I still think that there was a lot of political kind of forging of the consensus that had to be done. I think Minister Jatley did just a spectacular job of forging that consensus. I think that what the GST has shown, both in terms of the Constitutional Amendment Bill and subsequently in terms of the GST Council meetings themselves and all the decisions taken, it's shown that the GST Council and the GST process has been the first true institution, effective institution of cooperative federalism. Because if you think about it, 29 states, 7-8 union territories, center, they all are giving up some sovereignty in some sense for the larger good. And so to do that and to take decisions always by consensus, no voting, people rising above narrow state objectives, again for the larger good. I think it's been just a wonderful thing to watch as democratic federal decision making.
But this also brings me to a question where there is a clash of financial interest along with the political interest, especially in a year when general elections are just going to be around the corner. How do you do that tightrope walking? You have to tell the finance minister also about the good news, the bad news. And the finance minister often would be telling you that, look, this is a political risk we are taking. So that balancing act, how do you really bring out in an electoral year, especially when the country is going to face general elections, with reforms and all those?
Yeah, I think that in a sense, we're seeing this play out, right? Suddenly the international environment has turned quite tricky. We've had interest rates going up in the US, capital flight from emerging markets, possibly trade and currency wars, and That's had an impact on the exchange, and of course oil prices going up, it's had an impact on the Indian economy a lot. Now, as oil prices go up, political interests say, reduce prices to consumers. But I think that, as economic advisors and others in the Ministry of Finance, all of us, we try and take a more overall perspective, saying that, yes, this will favor one group, but then there are bigger macroeconomic consequences. And in some ways, I think the argument is easier to make when in fact conditions are unsettled, because that if you compromise with fiscal stability and macro stability, the repercussions, the feedback can be quite dramatic and quite immediate. You do something, international markets turn against you, exchange rates start going down, and we've seen this happening both in India and elsewhere. So those memories are there, and so those things help you make the case that maybe good politics is not good economics, and vice versa, that good economics can be good politics. So
but the oil prices is an emotive issue in the country, and is it basically because the stability of the macroeconomic indicators in our country are overly dependent on the crude oil prices? Is it because of that?
See, I think oil prices are sensitive in every country. I've just been in Sri Lanka, where they're having similar problems. In Haiti, just now, the government fell, or the finance minister had to resign because they raised oil prices. So I think in all countries, when lots of consumers are hit, it's going to be difficult. It's true that India, we are disproportionately, relative to maybe some other emerging markets, dependent on oil imports, and therefore oil has a bigger impact. And that's something in the long run, you have to try and reduce the dependence on oil. I think maybe we need to do more on that. But in the short run, you just have to face the consequences and see how best you can cushion the impact on the domestic economy, because you can't avoid the impact. You don't control the price of oil, you need oil, and so some things are going to happen. But all you can do is, through your own actions, certainly cushion the economy, certainly not add to the pressures. Any slippage on the fiscal side, do something populist, it could come back and bite you. And I think, and if you remember, Minister Jatley wrote a very blog saying that, this thing about a month ago. So I think it's not impossible, and it's not as if politicians themselves don't realize that, good politics can actually, because apparently good politics, if it's bad economics, it comes back to bite you as bad politics. I think that chain of causation, it's our job to try and explain, but I think people like Minister Jatley and the government, they are quite, they understand these things.
But specifically talking about the macroeconomic indicators like current account deficit, inflation, fiscal deficit, are we really in a risky territory, or we are poised safely, there's nothing to worry? What is the actual scenario?
I think that firstly, this is India today is not India in 2013. We're not in that. I think the overall macro situation is much better. Inflation is much lower. Current account deficits are better. Fiscal deficit, we have more reserves. Therefore, we can cushion our economy against that. Our growth is also higher. So I think that the situation is very different. But I just think that no country is devoid of vulnerabilities. All countries have certain vulnerabilities, and therefore, as prudent policymakers, you should always be, keep that, prudential perspective in mind. These are very serious matters. Any slippages, risks have serious consequences. So I think, this government has shown, the maturity and the responsibility to ensure that the macroeconomic situation. But that's not to say there are no pressures. There are pressures. Sometimes governments do give in. Maybe this government also has given in, but it's a tricky balancing act.
But so far we are on the right track.
Yeah, so far I think, on the macro front, I think, we are, and also I must say the RBI also has contributed to, maintaining this, managing it responsibly and appropriately given how unsettled international conditions are.
Jobs, the number of jobs growing in the country has also been a major concern, and especially that is because of multiple data which is coming in. Some say that jobs are not coming in, some saying no, jobs are rising. How do you believe that which data is a credible data? And are the jobs actually rising in the country? I want to know from you.
I honestly don't understand the jobs data.
Okay.
Because I think that, the most comprehensive and reliable data on overall jobs was the 2011-12 NSSO survey that was done. The next one, I think it's due out end of this year, early next year. I mean, that's the most, you see, the other things that have come out in between, whether it's the quarterly employment survey produced by the Labor Department, or even the new EPFO, ESIC data that people are using, I just, I haven't studied it enough, but I would not base, serious policy action on this, because they all have their limitations.
Because often we hear policymakers, especially Niti Aayog, they say that we need to change the benchmarks on which we arrive at a data related to jobs.
So that's happening.
Take into account a lot of other factors. So the current data which we have is actually not the credible data. Is that what I'm...
We don't have data that's consistent across time, that's comprehensive enough, that's resilient and robust enough to be able to, base economic policy on.
Okay.
I think that, I think we certainly are generating a lot of new data. I think we need to use that. And I think this EPFO data that we're getting is very valuable data. I think we should use that. But I don't think we're in a situation yet to be able to say, this shows X and therefore we need to do Y. I don't think we're in a situation. I think we are heading in that direction with the new unemployment survey that's going to come out. It's going to be annual in the urban sector. So I think we'll have more high frequency, more reliable data going forward. I think, but all that being said, I think it's fair to say that, there is a huge job challenge in the country. And I think we need to be creating all the jobs we can, because as we know, so many young people are joining the labor force.
Now that you're going to be demitting office very soon, can I ask you one question which is related to the idea of the lateral entry into the government sector, this recent decision taken by the government? What is your take on that?
Well, I'm a lateral entrant myself, so how can I, argue against that? No, see, my own view is that, and this is not shared even by some of my colleagues. Point number one, my, study of economic development around the world says, the number one determinant of economic development is strong state capacity. I think state capacity, public institutions need to be really. That means they're manned by competent, talented, skilled.
But if you look at the general talent pool within the government, there are too many people with generic abilities rather than specific abilities.
I'm coming to that. So if you have that view that this is very important, that you need all the talent you can, I think we need to get talent from everywhere. Outside, as in outside government, but also, more controversially outside, as in outside the country as well. I think we need both, we need wherever the talent and the competence we have, and the expertise, as you said, exactly, that, there are lots of jobs which require specific expertise. Even my job, for example, I think that it's not just good enough to be an economist or even a good economist. I think this job requires someone who has proficiency in
some special skill sets.
In international macroeconomics. You have to understand how the things add up. So I think both because you need all the talent you can, and also because you need specific expertise, I think lateral entry is a good thing. Now, it's not sufficient. It's necessary. It's not sufficient. You have to get the right people. You have to make sure appointments in. You have to make sure that they can integrate well once they come in. All these things you need to do. But I think that government needs all the talent it can. Government needs more talent than Silicon Valley or Bengaluru or Noida or Gurgaon. Government needs even more talent than even the private sector. Private sector will find its talent.
In the beginning of the interview, you said that you had a satisfying 4 years as
24/7 high. Don't bring it down. It's
okay. It was a 24/7 high time which you had in the ministry. Anything which you feel that you could have done and you've not been able to do?
Yeah, see, I think that certainly I would look back and say maybe, in some areas, reforms could have been progressed much more. Some areas where, maybe my team and I, we pushed, but we didn't get our way, or maybe areas we neglected. I think all of this is possible. But I think one big regret I do have is that, over the last 3 or 4 years, I've had, requests from a number of state chief ministers and finance ministers to create offices of CA like this in the states. And I've not had the bandwidth or had the time or the energy to do that. So that's why I say that if I do enough good karma in this life, maybe I'll be reborn as not only the chief economic advisor of the central government, but the chief economic advisor of all the state governments.
Oh my God.
At the same time.
So why are you planning to go back from India? You might as well just stay back for this job.
I know. Maybe I'll come back, I'll have to be reborn. I have to accumulate good karma for this.
But what are your plans like after 26th of July?
So I'm going to be, joining Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. I'm going to be teaching there. But I also want to do a lot of, researching and writing. So I'll be based in, Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'll also have, other appointments with some of the old institutes, like the Peterson Institute I was associated with. But my main job is going to be, going back to academics and to Harvard University. Yeah.
They say if you have to evolve politics in this country, you need good professionals. So why not contest elections? You've seen professionals, IPS officers joining politics. So how about Mr. Arvind Subramanian staying back and contesting elections?
Politics it requires a completely different set of skills, I think. So I don't think, I'd probably be a miserable failure in politics. So I think I should stick to doing economics and research and writing.
Okay, Mr. Subramanian, it was a pleasure talking to you. So that's it on this
Thank you
episode
very
of To The Point. See you next time with another personality. Goodbye and thanks for watching.